We're on to the book of Psalms today, and I've been wondering about this one for quite a while because you hear quotes about quite high-numbered psalms, and it turns out indeed there are 150 of these things, and they're various poems, songs and prayers. So differing lengths, mostly pretty short, but this does cover nearly 100 pages of the Bible, so it is quite a big old chunk. I mean, it's not far off 10% of the whole Bible. And it is one of the biggest books in terms of word volume. Given that these are songs and prayers and poems, it is obviously quite poetic, which, as we've established before, is not my gift. I just like clarity on things, like clarity of language and just say what you mean. And I appreciate that doesn't really work with big abstract concepts you need to illustrate. So, yeah, fine, but it doesn't mean to say I have to like it, does it? I'm also not quite sure how to treat these, because, again, these are a bit like the book of Job. This is poems and stuff written by people. A lot of them are written by King David, it seems. Some of them are anonymous, that's a hard word to say. Some even by Moses, actually, as it happens. But again, it's that sort of question mark of this is not God speaking, this is what people think about what God says. You know, people say things these days about how stuff works, and it's like, no, that's just all wrong. So I don't quite know how to deal with that, in the sense that if that makes it into the book of Psalms, we have to take it seriously, but the person could have been wrong. That being said, of course, we still have the same protection, as it were, that applied to the book of Job, in that someone has decided that whatever is in each of these Psalms is accurate enough to be worth including in the Bible. And as I understand it, Jesus quoted the Psalms quite a lot. So from the Christian angle, you've got the idea that if Jesus agreed with all this stuff, and then Christians can prove that he was who he says he was, then the Psalms by association have to be taken seriously. They're a bit of a mixed bag, these things, anyway, so I've just sort of flown through and made a few comments about a few. I've divided this up into doing 25 per video at a time. That seemed like a reasonable sort of block to do it in. So we have Psalm number 1, which, not the greatest of starts. It basically talks about it's good to be good and it's bad to be bad. Yeah, okay, fine. You know, I mean, I suppose we ought to establish the basics anyway. Psalm number 2, whoever wrote this is claiming to be the Son of God by the sounds of it, and it's not clear how you distinguish that Son of God from Jesus. That's a problem for later on, sure, but it's a bit odd anyway. Psalm number 10 we jump to, and it's talking about why hide yourself at times of trouble, and talking about how baddies will be held to account. And there's quite a big problem in that, in the sense that that's not really true, is it? You know, good people have terrible things happen to them, and terrible people get away with stuff, unless you're going much broader context and talking about beyond just the normal lifespan of human beings. Psalm number 11 talks about raining fiery coals and burning sulphur on the wicked, which has a similar problem of being not true. We had Sodom and Gomorrah, that they got fiery coal and brimstone, whatever, dropped on them, but we don't know if that story is true. And certainly in everyday life, hopefully not everyday life, you're seeing wickedness to a grand extent. But we know there's plenty of it going on in the world, and these people aren't getting fiery hot coals dropped on their heads. So, yeah, a bit difficult. Psalm number 12, God will keep the needy safe and protect from the wicked. Same idea, but awkward. Number 13, it's written by David. It's actually identified as written by King David. And he's trusting in God whilst in despair that God is hiding from him in his distress. And I guess that ties in nicely with the idea of, we counted in Job, that Job was okay in the end because he may have had a bit of a whinge bagging, but under the circumstances that was not unreasonable. But he kept his faith throughout, and God seems to like that. So, yeah, I mean, it's not clear if the book of Psalms was actually written after the book of Job. I mean, unlikely, because there's Psalms in here from Moses, so some of this is a collection written all over the place. We don't know what point, but I guess we don't know when Job was written, because we do know roughly when David was in his despair phase. But yeah, no, it's all kind of difficult. There was an interesting one in Psalm 16, verses 5 and 6. I remember my dad saying something about this, I think. It's a long time ago. But I don't really have anything to say about it, but I thought I'm going to note it just because I think my dad was talking about it. It talks about, Lord, start again. Lord, you alone are my portion and my cup. You make my lot secure. The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Surely I have a delightful inheritance. Okay, yeah, I'm not quite sure what to do with that. I assume that's a sort of a prayer of gratitude, I guess. But yeah, difficult one to know what to do with. The Psalm number 18 is David celebrating in very metaphorical and flowery language. It does seem to be David's strength. He wasn't a particularly good man in the sense that he did some pretty dodgy stuff. I mean, there were other people who sound to have been less sinful than David, yet David is held to be the sort of the pinnacle person, as it were, certainly so far. I guess that seems to relate to his enthusiasm with which he embraces God, maybe, something like that anyway. Psalm number 19 is a very sort of Quran-esque claim that the existence of the universe is evidence for God. Yeah, I mean, it raises the question, definitely. I'm not sure it's kind of evidence, but it's interesting that this is coming from a person, not from God, whereas in the Quran, my understanding is that it's God saying, is it not proof that this stuff is here for a thinking mind, that God exists or I exist? And it's interesting, actually, isn't it? There's things that God can say and that we can't say, and then vice versa, depending on the situation. So, yeah, well, that's quite interesting. Psalm 20, kind of along the same theme as we've been having here for a few of these. May the Lord grant all your requests. But he obviously doesn't do that. And I know this by virtue of the fact I do not have a Lamborghini. Admittedly, even if I did believe God exists, I would not ask for a Lamborghini. I mean, it's obviously, there's going to be some sort of self-selection in that. Well, actually, perhaps that's the answer, isn't it? You get your request, as long as what you request is reasonable and in keeping with the big thing. So yeah, a Lamborghini probably doesn't count. But if you ask for a Lamborghini, then you're probably a terrible person. So not to say it's a terrible person to own a Lamborghini, but to ask God for one, when he could be doing other things. That's what I mean there. Psalm number 22 gets very interesting, actually, because I recently watched The Passion of the Christ, did a video about it. You can have a look at that if you fancy such things. And I'm vaguely aware of this anyway, but there's this difficult idea that Jesus is on the cross, and he says that towards the end, well, it's obviously towards the end because he's on the cross, but towards the end of the time that he's on the cross, as I gather, he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? And this causes a number of problems. Partly, it's like, well, do you not know the answer? But I thought if you are who you say you are, then you should know the answer. There's also a question of, I guess it raises issues of the Trinity being Father, Son, Holy Spirit, if they're talking to themselves. But I think that's an issue we're going to have to deal with anyway, because Jesus did pray to God, I think quite prolifically, so that's something not too much to worry about. But that idea that it sounds a bit complainy, doesn't it? It's like, well, how did you not know why you've been forsaken and stuck on a cross and all the rest of it? But Psalm 22 is quite long, 31 verses I think it was, and it starts with that line and it ends with a very positive, what was the ending? He has done it! ! So granted, you're in the middle of being crucified, so you're not going to be particularly verbose about this sort of thing. So is verbose the right word? Oh, I don't know. I'm going to leave it in. We'll just be bold. I think that's about right. So it's like he's quoting that one little bit to refer to all the rest, and then it might, well, the way I read it, certainly it makes a lot more sense then. It's not just like, seriously, God, what's going on here and why have you done this? So you get a very different outcome to what he means there. So it's interesting we sort of solve that a little bit early, or potentially solve it. It occurred to me it's kind of like Frank Sinatra, the song My Way. It starts a bit bleak and oh dear, this is a bit miserable. But it sets the scene that takes you to the very big positive crescendo. So it seems like it's the same sort of idea, maybe, something like that. And then finally, Psalm 23, the line, though I walk through the shadow of the valley of death, I will fear no evil, etc., etc. Which doesn't really matter, does it? But we've had several bits of the Bible that you still see in everyday culture and language. It's just interesting how relevant it all is to us, regardless of whether it's true or not. But yeah, it's that idea that the culture in the West is built on the Bible, and it's like, oh, you can't really argue with that, can you? So, but yeah, it's a mixed bag. Some of it's very boring, some of it's very interesting, some of it's kind of in the middle. But we will go on to do the next 25 Psalms in the next video and see if we can find out anything there.